you are scraping into heaven, having accomplished nothing in your life that was actually what your salvation was for, reeking of the smoke of your burning life. This is not a desirable state of affairs. This is not something to take lightly. At least I'm going to heaven. It's embarrassing. It's gross. Why would you do that?
Welcome back to the Provisionist Perspective. I'm Drew.
And I'm Eric.
And this is going to be a really exciting episode today. Is this our second interview?
Third?
Third?
I don't know.
Okay. Yeah, I don't know. Anyways, and it's really exciting because Eric and I actually disagree on this topic. And Eric and I both disagree with our guest today. At least I'm pretty sure that we do. And it's on the topic of once saved, always saved. And specifically, our guest is going to tell us all about free grace theology. And so we'll bring him on and we'll let him introduce himself. This is Tim. And I actually don't know Tim.
But see, Tim, you and I go way back. Okay.
Yes.
I believe that you, as a seminary student, you were living in my house, right? Yep. While my parents gave you a room, poor seminary student, they have no money. And so they let you have a room in the house. They weren't charging you for that room, were they?
I paid some rent.
Okay.
And yeah, it was the 5 months before I got married.
5 months before I got married, we hit it off. We talked theology. We did martial arts. You beat me up a lot. It was good stuff. And it's been a long time, but you're here. How are you doing?
I'm doing well. God is good. It's really, Drew, it's a pleasure to meet you. I've been listening to you guys. I was actually listening to your R.C. Sproul episode earlier today. I'm about halfway through it.
Yeah, that one's blown up quite a bit. That has, I think, going out at over 1,000 views now. So it's interesting. Wow. What's sad about that, though, and Eric, I don't know if we've talked much about this, but I really enjoyed our prayer episode. I think that's one of my favorites, and it's one of the least viewed episodes that we've had recently.
People have said it's their favorite. I've gotten that comment. This is my favorite, but you're right. It's not.
People aren't watching it.
It's not controversy. It's not like drama, so they don't. They don't watch it. Yeah. So Tim, tell us what do you have going on? What are you doing in the kingdom of God? What are you all about?
At the moment, I'm bivocational. It doesn't have enough. I'm tri or quattrovocational or something. I have a private massage therapy practice. That came as a serious surprise to me. God sent me back to massage school at age 40. Finally, after the seminary degree, I had to get something to make money. Turns out. Yeah. I was a pro theologian for a while, but I'm not now. I pastor a church that is about 95% homeless folks. So that's as financially sustainable as it sounds like.
Yeah.
Other vocations. I teach Bible with a homeschool enrichment program using curriculum that a partner here in town and I wrote and market. And that covers a decent amount of the spread.
Where is in town for you, Tim?
Inglewood, Colorado. Okay. So just south of Denver.
Cool.
Great.
Nice.
So you're used to the snow. And when you heard about the snow that us Texans got and we were all freaking out, you were like,
well, but you guys don't get it.
That's true. All right, fine. Fair enough. We weren't ready. You're ready. We weren't ready.
We're ready. But I mean, if we got 3 feet dumped on us, I mean, as it was, that storm, I didn't go anywhere for 3 days. I'm half a block from a major road. If I could have got there, I could have got out, but I couldn't get out of the parking lot for like 2 days.
Oh, wow. Okay. That makes me feel a little bit better. I appreciate that. Thank you. That makes me
in North Carolina, we get a threat. Well, I'm not there anymore, but once, I'm from North Carolina. And if we get a threat of like 1 or 2 inches of snow, then it's just everything shuts down.
Right. Paralyzes the state.
Oh, no, we're not. Everybody buys up all the bread and all the milk.
Well, but as a taxpayer, do you want to shell out for snowplows that you use once every 4 years? It's not worth it.
Yeah.
No, we don't. So we did a question and answer episode, I believe it was, and someone asked us about free grace, and we kind of said something about free. Yeah, we kind of We were dismissive and condescending. And you
No,
said
we wouldn't have been condescending. Maybe a little bit dismissive, but
I was exaggerating. And Tim wrote me. He's like, "You guys don't understand free grace theology." And I was like, "You're right. I don't. Hey, want to come on and explain it to us?" And so here you are.
Yeah. In fairness, Drew, I should tell you that what I told Eric was I could furnish some introductions to people that most free grace people would be happy to own.
Right.
And he invited me instead. So
see, they're going to see this and they're going to go, wait a minute. And then they're going to want us. They're going to talk to us.
That's the trick. It's the bait and switch.
Which is perfect. And I'm still good for all those introductions.
Tim, you're our bait.
Excellent.
Just kidding.
Be like, you let that Nichols guy talk. Jeez. All right. Can I come sort this out?
Oh, geez.
Perfect.
Oh, geez. Yeah.
Perfect. So yeah, what is free grace theology? We get so steeped in our Arminian versus Calvinism, non-Calvinism versus Calvinism, and hopefully provisionism versus Calvinism becomes the new thing going forward. Selfishly, that's what we hope. We get so steeped in that paradigm. How does free grace fit in or not, or tell us about it?
Okay, so I'm going to say right off the bat, since the polls we have to talk about Arminianism and Calvinism if we're talking about soteriology, Protestant soteriology at all, and for reasons more sociological than theological, but there it is. So I don't think there's really such a thing as a free grace Arminian, like that would self-consciously own that.
Okay.
There certainly is such a thing as a free grace Calvinist. Louis Sperry Schaeffer, for example, was one. His systematic theology shamelessly lays out 5 points of Calvinism, and he's unquestionably free grace. Now, his 5 points of Calvinism would get him like exiled from the OPC, say. It's a little weak in spots from what you and I would know as 5-point Calvinism. But there are certainly still Calvinist free grace guys who are solid Calvinists ish.
So how do they fit that in?
Unconditional election, irresistible grace, not as much on perseverance of the saints.
Yeah, that would be the one point I would expect.
Spongy on limited atonement. Yeah, the way Schaeffer did that was he talked about perseverance of the saints, and what he really meant was eternal security. So the saints will continue to be saints, not the saints will continue to act like saints.
Right.
So that was his kind of workaround. And in the Presbyterianism of the sort of Bible churchy Presbyterianism of the 40s, that was, broadly acceptable. You would be hard pressed not to get yourself a heresy trial over that today in any Presbyterian denomination I can think of. Any of the conservative ones anyway.
Like as far as affirming eternal security as opposed to perseverance of the saints.
Well, yeah, you would have to, all in on eternal security for those who are genuine believers, but you would have to move on to affirming perseverance of the saints.
Right. And for our audience, because I think I know what you mean by this, but for our audience, can you distinguish between perseverance of the saints, eternal security, and once saved, always saved? Can you talk about your understanding of that between those?
So once saved, always saved, and eternal security, we would use interchangeably. That's the same thing.
But there is a nuance among the non-free grace theologians that hold to OSAS that would be different from what you believe, right?
I'm not sure that's the case.
That's what we'll disagree on today.
Great, cool. I'm looking forward to that. In terms of that versus perseverance, perseverance theology ends up with the saints will inevitably bear fruit, and then the practical outworking of that turns out to forgive me, I'm just going to say it. The practical outworking of that ends up doing the devil's work for him. We've got a believer who's trapped up in some sin, and what he most needs to know is that he belongs to Jesus. And what we're going to do instead is, pin him down, pry the breastplate of righteousness off him, and stab him in the heart, and with a bunch of questions about whether he believes he really belongs to Jesus, because he can't stop looking at porn or whatever. When the practical outworking of this, and this is the thing, free grace is above all a theology of assurance. The grounding of discipleship is that you know you belong to Jesus, and everything else flows out of that. And the funny thing about that is that pretty much every Protestant stream of thought starts there. Like your Heidelberg Catechism, what's the first question? What is your only hope in life and in death? That I belong to my faithful Savior, Jesus Christ. Body and soul. Like this, you'll have the same things in the Westminster, same things like I belong to Jesus. That is the grounding of discipleship, and we all kind of know it. But then we have a tendency to develop theology that undermines that.
And I guess the question becomes the difficulty in the issue of assurance, because Paul says that he wants us to have full assurance of our faith, and there are also other statements like test to make sure that you're in the faith, so that then from there you can have assurance. I think the main challenge for us in the whole assurance thing, even from our three different perspectives, would be, how do you know? Like when the temptation comes, when the doubts come, how can you be assured? Or what would you look to as your assurance? And I think we would probably all say the same thing, which is Jesus. but we might warn people differently, or counsel people differently, or use different passages or something like that. So maybe that's kind of where the nuance of disagreement comes in. But
well, and maybe that's a way to talk about this. Would be, okay, we've got this guy. He's struggling with porn. He can't seem to stop. Okay, so what do we tell him?
Right.
Do we tell him, like, you really need to come to Jesus? Obviously,
you need to get saved. You need to get
saved. We need to baptize you all over again because clearly it didn't take last time. Like, do we tell him that?
Right.
Do we tell him, you belong to Jesus, and therefore, and then if we tell him, and I suspect all three of us would tell him from listening to you guys, we would all want to start with, you belong to Jesus. Now let's get sorted out. But what do I need to be comfortable saying that?
Right. And that's the question. I think that, so let's go straight into the polemics here, so that I can identify where maybe some of my misunderstanding is, because I've read a little bit about free grace theology, not heaps. This is one book that I read. This was my first encounter with it, which is pretty cool. It's sorry for covering your face there, Tim, but
it's all right.
I actually kind of like this better. Can we just leave this out? This is better.
You can just puppet the rest of the show.
There we go.
Our audio listeners are really confused right now. It's called The 10 Most Misunderstood Words in the Bible by Robert Wilkin. You said that you've met Bob. You said that you've
he generally goes by Bob Wilkin. He writes under Robert N. Wilkin. But yeah,
okay, cool.
Yeah, I know Bob well.
And this has a section on a few different words, like faith, wrath, saved, and so on. There's a really cool section in the appendix that talks about the word election and how that's been loaded with a lot of theological baggage. And from memory, he's basically like, the word means choose, guys.
Yes.
Let's not get bent out of shape over. And
then you need to, and you're very familiar with this line of thought: chosen for, by whom, for what, all of those questions. Yeah. So we're not like there are free grace Calvinists. I'm neither. And I disagree with Arminianism and Calvinism. Something I say often is the spectrum. Like when we talk about the whole theological spectrum from Arminians to Calvinists, what you're saying is something like every color of the rainbow from red to pink.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
There's so many different.
A whole lot more out there. And I part company with Arminians and Calvinists on premises that they agree on.
Right. What would be some of those premises?
One of the leadoff ones would be depravity, total depravity. Their take
Right.
on total depravity. So the reason the Arminians,
which all three of us would agree on.
we're all together on this. I think the reason they need prevenient grace is to rescue them from their understanding, their misunderstanding of depravity, and then they've got to get some back to from a Calvinist understanding of depravity. You have to get back to, and your choice matters. And so the way we do that is that God made it so everybody's choice matters. And all of that is just unnecessary if you never lost your ability to choose.
Right. So what you're saying is that all three of us are semi-Pelagian heretics. That's what you're saying, right?
I mean, I'm sure you have listeners who are going to hear that. Yeah, I have no doubt. Yeah, we've wrestled with a lot of the stuff the mind games and the word games that you talk about, that particularly like internet discernment ministry Calvinists use to control the intellectual capital. We've wrestled with all that same stuff for decades. We're neither Calvinist nor Arminian, and regularly accused of being Pelagian because we believe you actually have a choice.
Right. Controversial. Wow. Amazing.
Shocking, right?
That's a quote right there, by the way. What was it? The language control that they used to control the intellectual. Can you say that again? That was just
maybe. But, well, the language games they play to control the intellectual capital. Because you know this in your own venue, right? Calvinists do not like. There's not a huge majority of Calvinists in the evangelical world, but the amount of intellectual space they control is enormous.
Right.
All of it.
And well, largely, and that's not entirely an accident. That's
of course not.
Well, but and I don't mean that in a like there's a smoke-filled room somewhere way. I mean that in a like in America, at least during the westward expansion, the way you became a Baptist minister was you went and hung around with a Baptist pastor for about 6 weeks, and then he sent you to the next town on the frontier, and off you go. The way you became a Presbyterian minister was you got a classical education, and then you went to seminary for 3-4 years. You got a master's in divinity, and then you this is why there are a lot more Baptist and Methodist churches than there are Presbyterian churches. But also, this is why the Presbyterians own the intellectual capital, because that's what they invested in.
Yeah, I think that's a big part of the draw to Calvinism and the staying power of Calvinism, that the Calvinists you're drawn to it for this reason, and then it keeps you there, that you are the guys with the intellectual ones. You guys are the ones with the deep theology. And I understand why they believe that. And that history is good history for me. But
it's a bit of an optical illusion, but if you walk into the bookstore and pick up 10 fat books, how many of them are going to be Calvinist?
9 of them, and maybe all 10. And so I understand. Drew and I have, and I'm sure we'll do this again, sort of rattled the cages of our own side a little bit, kind of like, you guys need to start, engaging in this, and you don't get to just stay in your churches, and then stay in your churches, put your head down. I'm just being a pastor. I'm just doing kingdom work, and then wondering how your church got reformed when you weren't looking. You don't get to do, and so we've rattled that cage a little bit, and we'll continue to do that. But yeah, our side, has a lot of blame for not caring about. That's just the academic, intellectual. But they won the internet. Like, it's over. You ignored it, and they won. So now what?
Well, I wrote a book, Eric, but Crossway won't publish me. But that's the thing, right?
Right.
You have to build your own infrastructure.
And they've got the infrastructure.
They've got.
Oh my goodness!
Well, and to give credit where due, like, it's not like they stole it.
No, they built it.
They built it.
Yeah, exactly.
They are publishing us into the ground, all of us non-Calvinists together. If that's not their fault. That's our fault.
Yep, that's true. Preach.
Preach.
Oh
Yeah.
my gosh.
This
Yeah.
is actually like I have this same conversation with free grace with my folks, and the sort of the big iconic free grace lordship salvation debate between MacArthur and Zane Hodges in the 80s, and that back and forth. MacArthur published us into the ground. There's a whole commentary set. Like, if you're a busy pastor and you're trying to figure out how do I read this passage that's looking tough today, like Johnny Mac's got your back.
Yeah.
You know, if you want a free grace interpretation, you best know somebody. Like, you got to call the right person and find out, where, somebody wrote a journal article back in 82 and, the journal's gone out of print, but I got a copy I'll send to you. Like, it's like that. So,
Yeah.
I mean, and then we whine like we're some oppressed minority. Come on now.
And this is the challenge that we face as provisionists who were kind of born out of the Southern Baptist traditionalist camp, and have since in many ways been disavowed. but our scholars, most of them would be of the traditionalist stripe. And most of the material that I see, like you said, come from these Southern Baptist Theological Quarterly that you can download the PDF and like print out and stuff. And I'm like, this is not accessible. This is not accessible. Come on. Like, you got gty.org for Johnny Mac's, all of his stuff organized. Click the passage, click the, book of the Bible that you want to read.
Great.
And it's so easy.
Yep.
And then we have journal articles that, like you said, you got to know somebody to even, and then are they searchable? You're going to look for topic, anyways. So that's enough ranting about that.
Well, one of the biggest questions we get is, hey, are there any non-Calvinist resources? And we try our best, but the reason that question keeps coming up is because if you Google it,
yeah.
what are the first two pages?
Calvinist resources. Yes.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Well,
Right.
To that, yes, there are a few.
Nice.
Yeah.
What we will do at the end of this is we'll make sure to get links to that stuff. They're on Amazon and stuff, I presume, Tim?
Yeah. Although, in all fairness, like, searching Amazon can be a bit like running Google, looking for stuff.
True.
If you've got tastes that run to the theological minority.
Yeah. We'll get links to those in the bottom. But so before we go off on another rabbit trail of Calvinism and Arminianism, so that was Bob Wilkins' book. Another book that I've read from Free Grace Theology is by Charles Stanley, and admittedly, it's called Eternal Security. It's very much a layman's book, and it's pretty bad from my perspective anyways. Like, from a theologically minded guy that wants to go in and kind of hear all the nitty gritty on the different controversial passages, he just kind of breezes over it and goes, oh yeah, this, that, and the other. So that's another book that I've read, but let me try to represent my main concern with Free Grace Theology, and you can tell me with whether or not this is true or not. So you and I, Tim, would both agree that once someone is born again, they will not be able to forfeit their salvation, right? In the sense of be finally lost.
Yes.
Whereas Eric would disagree with us on that. But what we do disagree on is whether or not a once believer can become an unbeliever and still be saved, right? Isn't that the main?
Tell me a little more about what you mean, but how the second thing you said is different from the first thing you said.
The first thing that I said, my position is that once you become a believer, you will continue believing, and you may struggle with various different sins and stuff like that. And the Free Grace position is, if I can be a bit polemic, is that you can become a believer and then you can become an atheist and still be saved. And still be born again, still have the Holy Spirit, so to speak. Yep. And the however, what many would say is that, but at the final judgment, you will receive a significant and severe loss of rewards at the bema seat of judgment. Is that so far correct?
True. Yeah, that's true. I want to hang an asterisk on that because there's something I want to say about that.
Do it. Go ahead.
Because the way that often gets presented is like, you're going to get to heaven, which is the big prize, but you won't get any jelly beans. Um,
Yeah. Yeah.
God is about the business of reconciling the world to himself. And we do not serve a God who simply died and rose. We serve a God who died for his enemies, rose to make them his friends, and means to take us up into the family business. And his goal, and C.S. Lewis talks about this at the end of Mere Christianity, and it's awesome the way he says it. He says, again, God is about making you into a certain kind of person, and he doesn't care what it costs him or what it costs you. And the cynic in me, well, for him, it's a sunk cost at this point.
Right.
I'm still getting cheese grated over here, but it is for my good. And he is about taking us up into the family business, making us people that the world can look at and see the family resemblance, right? And he is working in our lives to do that in such a way that when you get there, when I arrive in heaven, what he wants from me is to be able to go, yes, well done. That's what I wanted.
Right.
And then, yes, the scripture talks about rewards attending that. And scripture also talks about people whose works are burned, who enter heaven saved yet so as through fire. Paul talks about in 1 Corinthians. You can enter heaven. You will not enter heaven without. Yeah, you will not enter heaven without seeing the fire. You may enter heaven with gold, silver, and precious stones that have been tested by the fire. You may enter heaven reeking of the smoke of the burning wood, hay, and stubble that you invested your life in. And yeah, loss of reward is a way of talking about that. Loss of reward doesn't quite, when we talk about it that way, and this is our own fault. This has been the free grace discourse, is often like, that's exactly, well, yeah, but you'll lose rewards, and that's all they'll say about it. Like, you are scraping into heaven, having accomplished nothing in your life that was actually what your salvation was for, reeking of the smoke of your burning life. This is not a desirable state of affairs. This is not something to take lightly. At least I'm going to heaven. It's embarrassing. It's gross. Why would you do that?
And I think for our audience and for everyone that this is something, and Eric can interject if he does, but this is something we all agree on, right? Is the fact that at the end of our Christian lives, whether you're conditional security, once saved, always saved in the way that I am, or in the way that Tim is with free grace theology, we will get to the end of our lives and we will face fire. And whether or not we have built, with wood, hay, and stubble or the precious gems will determine how much loss. And that's what 1 Corinthians chapter 3 there in the first 15 verses, it describes it as loss. And so that's something that we can all affirm, and something that we can be, I think, afraid of facing God and him being disappointed, and the fact that we didn't do what we were supposed to do with what he had given us. So to kind of put us on the same page and acknowledge that this is something that we all should be agreeing on. I think that even our Reformed brethren should, although there's some issues there with the whole, anyways, let's not go down that rabbit trail. Continue.
Most of our Reformed brethren are gloriously inconsistent around this, and don't develop the sorts of agency problems that take you in bad directions where you just relax because everything's determined.
Right.
Well, and this is the case. This is the case across Christianity, right? Most of us agree on what it looks like when it's going well. We tend to develop some disagreements when things start to go sideways. We tend to diverge some on what exactly has gone wrong and what exactly ought we to do about it. Most of us agree, we look at the life of someone who's really walking with God and doing well, and there's not too many segments of Christianity where we differ on what that looks like. Maybe minor stuff about, but he had a beer, okay. There's going to be some scuffles there, but where we develop serious theological disagreements is, what do we do with that guy that won't stop looking at porn?
Right. Right. And I think that to the point that you made earlier about the debate between Zane Hodges and John MacArthur in the 1980s, in my opinion, and obviously, I disagree with free grace theology, so take this for what you will. You don't seem like an easily offended guy, and you work at a church with homeless people, so I'm sure you're fine. Is that I think that, so there's the lordship salvation, which tends to be the trend among our Reformed brethren of basically, if you're struggling consistently with porn, you're probably basically not saved and need to repent, and then you get this rebaptized kind of confess your sins situation going on that I think, Paul Washer is known for these kinds of, like, you walk away from his sermon and you're just like, man, maybe I'm just not even saved. And people like us three, I think, would say, can we not undermine the assurance of the saints in this way, with this lordship salvation stuff? But I think that, in my opinion, the free grace theology is a reaction to that, such that it's it's completely free. Once you're saved, you're in, and so on and so forth. And while I think it's important to acknowledge that all three of our responses to someone who was a once believer, now atheist, however we want to frame that theologically, we're going to be calling them to repent and believe in Jesus.
But and I think we would. And my question is, if it's a reaction to lordship salvation, but then my question would be, so then what motivates a sinful fleshly believer, or even someone who is professing atheism, however far gone we want to, say that person is, somebody who is this carnal Christian, so to speak, what would motivate them to stop sinning and to get right and begin behaving like a family member of Yahweh, when at the same time we're going to tell them, well, it's Tim, even if we take it as what you're saying, you crawl into heaven, reeking of the burning, the smoke of your own sins, and everyone sees it, it's shameful, it's embarrassing. And what do you say to somebody who's a carnal Christian who would just say, so what?
Well, who will say, yeah, but dude, it's like a lot of fun right now.
Yeah, I mean, like, so what? This is great. I mean, you guys are missing out.
Right. Well, what I'm gonna say is, you belong to Jesus, and he ain't gonna let that go. So
it's not gonna be fun for long.
Yeah. Don't lose my number. We'll talk in a little.
I mean, that's fair, because I remember, and I remember those sermons, and still keep seeing those sermons that pit sin as fun and Christian as not fun. And I'm like, that wasn't my experience at all.
No,
like when I was, it's so like when I was sinning and on a regular basis, and I really don't sin that much anymore. But when I look back, and when I was sort of trapped in sins, that wasn't fun at all. It wasn't cool. I did not enjoy it.
No, and that's part of you were saved for a purpose.
Yeah.
And God is about that purpose in your life. You are going, well, okay, I got my fire insurance. I'm going to wander off and do my thing now. And I'm not going to say, oh, you can't do that. He's going to take it back, because I don't think he will. What I am going to say is, yeah, you can do that, because God is that gracious. Let me know how that works out for you. Let's talk in a week or a month. Let's see what happens with that. Because yes, and I'm like, there may be room for a stronger pastoral look. This is bad. You don't want to do this. And I'm willing to do all of that. But like, this is not a person you have a theological conversation with most of the time, right? It doesn't work. It just doesn't work. Like, okay, so yes, yeah, this is the father and the prodigal son, right? He gives you say, I'm leaving and I'm taking the money. He goes, all right. What I want you to know is that daddy's here when you're ready. And if you're going to go blow it on hookers and crack, all right, you have that choice.
Yeah.
I think that regarding the you don't have a theological conversation with them, we talked a little bit about this with Sean Cole, who's a Calvinist pastor. Basically, in this pastoral situation, you wouldn't lead with this was immutably predestined for God's glory. Like, you just wouldn't tell them that truth, even though it is. You might get there eventually or whatever. And so I like to acknowledge that whatever camp you're in, you're probably not going to lead with this kind of like head type of theology type of stuff.
Yeah.
You want to talk to their heart. But I will say, in my experience, because I'm in a pastoral position here in New Zealand over university students and stuff, and I catch up with young men fairly frequently that are dealing with these very issues, and often because I come from a culture, this is just, do with this what you will. This can segue into a discussion, I don't know, but I come from a culture in the Southeast that's very much, we're all Christians, I'm a Christian, I got baptized, this and that and the other, and maybe this is theologically informed, right? But when I'm talking to someone, I'm like, you don't even understand the gospel, you don't believe the gospel, you're not a Christian. And so I, rightly or wrongly, I come from a cultural mindset of, I just don't assume anyone's a Christian unless they give me a reason to think otherwise. And so even, some of our students might end up watching this. So I don't know. Like, the point is that I want to be as careful when I approach this to say, okay, let's talk about, where is your assurance of forgiveness coming from? Let's talk about, so if you were to stand before God and he were to say, why should I let you in? What would you say? And then depending on their answer there, usually you can identify where their trust is theologically, and then you can identify what's most needed. Because for me, if I'm having a conversation with a young guy who's struggling with pornography and he says something like, oh, I try to be a good person, I go to church and, try to read my Bible, then he has a completely different target issue than one that has a misunderstanding of the gospel, or says, I believe in Jesus, and then I also confess my sins. I was talking to a young guy the other day that kind of gave this faith alone and type of answer. But then when I pushed him on it, he was like, oh, okay, yeah, no, I get what you're saying. It's definitely this. So some of it's a lack of discipleship, but I guess I would say we do, from my own practice, I approach it from the theological perspective of, let's make sure that they're Christians. And then from there I can say, based on what you've told me and based on the authority of what the scriptures say, you're forgiven, you're cleansed, you're declared righteous. Let's talk about what you're dealing with right now and how to deal with this. That's how I would approach it. I think that maybe that kind of answers some of your question, Eric, regarding like if somebody comes to us and they're like, listen, this is what I'm dealing with. How do we respond to that? Because that's kind of the question is the question of the day here, I think, is assurance, and how do we know that we're assured of our salvation? How do we know that we belong to Jesus? And I think
pastorally, how do you not tell somebody they're saved and then proceed on that basis when they're actually not, and you missed a really big cue, right?
Right. Like that's what we don't want to do, right? Like we don't want to be like, oh yeah, you're good, don't worry about it. Don't worry about repenting.
You don't want to miss that. Like, if what you need to be doing is evangelizing this person, you don't want to miss that.
Right.
That's kind of important. And you don't want to then be moving forward and coaching them in how to live with the power of the Spirit in their life when he ain't there.
Right. Exactly. Yeah. And I think that, to pull a pin out of a grenade and throw it into the crowd to kind of get some discussion going again, because this is how we ENTPs operate. The conditional security and the free grace, from my perspective, don't seem to as readily acknowledge, hey, this person could have been a false professor and therefore was never saved to begin with. One's answer is usually, and I realize this is sweeping, but is usually, yep, he's saved because he once believed. And the other one is usually he believed and then forfeited his salvation. Whereas I would say there is such a thing as false professing believers that we need to acknowledge here theologically, but.
And I would say, I start from the same default position you do, that I want I want to know, is this person actually saved? But as a practical matter, and to be fair to my free grace brethren, there are other folks who have what they would regard as well-founded differences with me on this. But as a practical matter, the gospel is pretty simple, and we can roll that up. Like, I may have a question mark. Did this kid just throw a stick in the fire at camp and have no idea what he was doing? But everybody else was throwing a stick in the fire, and he didn't want to be the weird one. Or did he actually believe the gospel at that point? I don't know. God did not give me enough information to work the door of heaven. Like, if he died today, would he get into heaven? I left my magic 8-ball in the car. I don't know. But what I do know is that if we're sitting right now, so real situation, I had a guy come in into the center where we hold church services on Saturday nights, and over the meal we're talking, and he says, he's an older guy, he mid to late 50s, I'd say, which for my population is older. And he says, a couple of my friends have died over the last couple of weeks, and it's gotten me thinking, and I'm a little worried. I'm like, oh yeah, tell me about that. Well, I've done a lot of things I'm really not proud of, and I mean, he's covered in gang tats, so I believe him. And I used to go to church. I was raised, grandma raised me to go to church and all like that, but I got away from it when I was a young man and never really got back. And I don't know where I'm at with God. You know what? I don't know where he's at with God either. But it's really easy. And what I did in that conversation was I walked him through the gospel. I said, so like, you grew up in church, you've heard all your life, Jesus died for your sins. What maybe nobody told you is what that actually means for you. What that actually means for you, whether you ever knew it or not, is that every sin, every dark thing, every sickness, every character flaw was nailed to a cross 2,000 years ago, was buried in the heart of the earth. It all died with Jesus. And when God raised him from the dead, he did not come out of the grave dragging a hefty bag full of your crap. Like, hey, you lost this. It's gone. It's buried. It's done. If you're still clinging to that, you could let it go right now and be free for the rest of your life. Like, as far as God, Jesus took care of all of it. So here's the thing. Do I know that he believed that before? No. If he believes it now,
yeah,
then we're there.
Right.
So I just lay it out as these are the facts of the situation. I'm not selling vacuum cleaners. I don't need them to sign anything. I just lay it out. So does that make sense to you? And I'm always a little worried if they say yes. What I like to hear a little more is that can't be right.
Right.
Like,
because then they recognize what you're talking about, like this radical grace.
How can I just lay off my stuff on somebody else? And I get this all the time. Like, that, surely no. Like, right. Yes, exactly. It's not right. It's wrong all the way down to the ground. It's if God had come to you and said, hey, I know you screwed up, but I got a plan. Hear me out here. I'm going to torture my kid to death for you. What do you think? Like, you would be morally obligated to object, right? Like, that's not okay. But here's the thing. He already did it and he didn't consult you. So are you going to pretend that he didn't, or are you going to move forward on the basis that he did? So, okay. So now we're there. He might not have been a believer 10 minutes ago, but he is now. So now we have that conversation. God has taken the question of whether you're his son off the table now. It's done. You're his kid. The only remaining question is, what kind of son are you going to be? And he wants you to be the kind of son that when you go rolling into heaven, hopefully many years from now, he's going to be like, that's my kid. Yes. Salesman of the year flag. Like, whatever, right? He does not want it to be like, that's my kid.
So would you say, here's another maybe proverbial grenade.
Yes.
So would you say that that's what Hebrews 6 is about? That when it's falling away from behaving like being like his kid. And there are real consequences if you do that. But the author of Hebrews, Barnabas, isn't saying falling away, you're undoing your sonship. It's falling away, you're no longer being like his kid, and there are some real consequences to that. I mean, is that what Hebrews 6 is on the free grace model?
And this is where
I can throw it up here if you want to read it.
Yeah, let's do it.
Yeah, do it.
Here we go.
Well, yes and no, because what I'm gonna this is where, well, let me put it this way. You know, the danger inherent in saying, well, what about those passages? Right? This is the same conversation you have with Calvinists about election. What about those passages? Well, those passages are often not talking about the same thing. That's
right.
And obviously we're not approaching this from the point of view of like, oh, have you even read Hebrews 6? You know,
well,
let me just throw Hebrews 6 at you, you know.
Well, no, throw it up there. Let's go through it.
The point is that I'm acknowledging that you know, if we say, what about this passage, then we should have an answer. And most of us do have answers. Whether or not we agree or disagree is a different issue. But here, I'll read it, and then you can talk about this a bit, Tim. So, well, let's back up a little bit, because I feel like context.
I was going to back us up a little in chapter 5 anyway. So yeah.
Cool. Can we start here by this time?
Yeah, that was exactly where I was going to go.
Great. For though by this time you ought to be teachers, you need someone to teach you again the first principles of the oracles of God, and you have come to need milk and not solid food. For everyone who partakes only of milk is unskilled in the word of righteousness, for he is a babe. But solid food belongs to those who are full of age, that is, those who by reason have used their senses exercised, who by reason of use have their senses exercised to discern both good and evil. And then let's go to 6 here. Therefore, leaving the discussion of elementary principles of Christ, let us go on to perfection, not laying again the foundation of repentance from dead works and of faith towards God. By the way, this is the NKJV. Some versions say, let us go on to maturity, which I think is significant, but repentance from dead works and of faith toward God, of the doctrine of baptisms, of laying on of hands, of the resurrection of the dead, and of eternal judgment. And this we will do if God permits. And then here's the money. Here's the big one here. For it is impossible for those who are once enlightened and have tasted the heavenly gift and have become partakers of the Holy Spirit and have tasted the good word of God and the powers of the age to come, if they fall away, to renew them again to repentance, since they crucify again for themselves the Son of God and put him to an open shame. And I'm going to keep reading a bit too, because I think this is important. For the earth which drinks in the rain that often comes upon it and bears herbs useful for those whom it is cultivated receives blessing from God. But if it bears thorns and briars, it is rejected and near to being cursed, whose end is to be burned. Is that enough? Should we read some more, or
just get one more?
Okay, here we go.
Get 9 in there.
But, beloved, we are confident of better things concerning you, yes, things that accompany salvation, though we speak in this manner. For God is not unjust to forget your work and labor of love, which you have shown toward his name, in that you have ministered to the saints and do minister. And we desire that each one of you show the same diligence to the full assurance of hope until the end, that you do not become sluggish, but imitate those who through faith and patience inherit the promises.
Sure.
So how about this? I'll throw it back up there. And if you want to highlight a few things and talk about them from your perspective, we can proceed to disagree with you. Just kidding.
So leave 4 to 6 in the middle there. That works.
Okay. Yep. Cool.
That's where all the.
That's right.
That's where everybody goes.
Bro, have you even read this?
Yeah. This is where Eric feels like he's taking crazy pills with us once saved, always guys, and just like, have you even read Hebrews 6, man?
Okay. So a couple of things. The first one is the if isn't there in verse 6. There's a series of participles. It is impossible for those who were once enlightened and have tasted the heavenly gift, have become partakers of the Holy Spirit, have tasted of the good word and the powers of the age to come, and falling away, to renew them to repentance. It's not this. So it's impossible for this group of people about whom all of these things are true to renew them again to repentance.
Just pulling it up in the CSB to see if it's any different.
Who have
so
fallen
this one
away.
says, and who have fallen away.
I'm a New King James guy, but they biffed it on this one.
Yeah. How's that significant from your perspective if they fall away as opposed to who have fallen away?
So we're talking about a particular group of people, that it's impossible to renew these people to repentance. That's what it says, right?
Right.
And on anybody's reading.
I think that, and we can talk about this a little bit, but if you're talking about forsaking the faith here, and you're interpreting this as, like you said, Tim, it says, where is it? Impossible to renew those to repentance. That's a challenge. That's a challenge for a whole nother discussion, I think.
Right. Well,
some Arminians will disagree on. So
once you move into a conditional security view, one of the things you have to grapple with in this passage is if this is talking about a conditional security situation, can they come back? Because if this is telling you that it's possible for someone to fall away, then it is also telling you they can't come back. That's what it's saying.
And it's interesting because both Eric and I would say that it's possible for you to fall away from the faith, but we would say who that is and what they're doing and why is different. Whereas you would say you can't fall away from the faith. I
would say you can fall away from the faith. What do we mean by that? Okay. And what is at stake? See, there's ask all the questions you would ask if you saw the word elect here.
Right.
Who, from what,
So when we see the word renew, we need to ask, renew to what, from what, who,
and who is renewing them.
The biggest question for Hebrews is who is being warned. I think that's the biggest question.
I think Hebrews answers that question easy, but scroll back up to the beginning of 6 for a second.
Yep.
5, he's saying that by this time you ought to be teachers. And later on in the book, he'll talk about, remember back in the beginning when you joyfully accepted the plundering of your goods. And he's writing this to people who are rock stars, who were rock stars of the faith early on. If we give full credit for what he says about them later, and they're tired.
What passage are you talking about with the
really progressed? I'm looking it's later in the book. So late chapter 10, 10:32. But recall the former days in which, after you were illuminated, you endured a great struggle with sufferings, partly while you were made a spectacle of by both reproaches and tribulations, and partly while you became companions of those who were so treated. For you had compassion on me in my chains, and joyfully accepted the plundering of your goods, knowing that you have a better and an enduring possession for yourselves in heaven. Therefore do not cast away your confidence, which has great reward, for you have need of endurance. And he goes on. So the people that he's writing to, there was a time when they were the people we all want to be when we grow up. They were persecuted and they handled it. When others among them were persecuted, they didn't shrink back from associating with them. They joyfully accepted. How many of us, seriously, when the Twitter mob breaks into your house and takes your stuff, how many of us are going to joyfully accept that? Right? They did. That's the people he's writing to. These are not schlubs.
Right.
They're tired. And they need endurance, and he's giving them a hard word. But we're talking to people, he addresses them as believers. He talks addresses them as holy brethren at the beginning of chapter 3 after just saying,
just going to bring this up, actually.
Giving the basis for being right before that, in 2,
So
as much as the children have partaken of flesh and blood, he himself likewise shared in the same. So he's our brother, God's our father, therefore holy brothers.
Yeah. I think what's so interesting about this, and this is why I like this kind of three-way discussion here, is that you and Eric, because of passages like this, both agree that, and tell me if I'm wrong, that everyone that's being addressed here are genuine believers.
Sure. Yes.
Yeah.
Right. So the difference that I would make is that, let's see, where is it here? It's in verse 6. So I'll highlight it. In the same way that, so Eric and I have spoken before churches, and you pastor a church. So in the same way that you're dealing with a congregation and you're speaking brothers and sisters, you're addressing both brothers and sisters that are born again in there, and the general kind of like brethren of, but you need to test to see it and you're in the faith and repent and believe if you haven't yet. So and I think that in the same way that we would do that, Barnabas often does this through his letter. And
You're
here's
an example. So embarrassed when it turns out to be Priscilla.
That's true.
Yeah.
I'm not pushing hard for that. I'm just good.
Yeah. Especially, does that present a problem for us complementarians, Eric? Is that can Priscilla be the author of Hebrews and we can still be complementarians?
Can JL put a stake through Sisera's head?
Absolutely.
Even though it is a man's job?
Wait, hold on, say that again?
Can JL put a stake through Sisera's head, even though Deborah says it's a man's job?
It's a man's job to put stakes through people's heads?
Yes. Deborah says, nobody gets out of that story happy. Deborah reprimands Barak for hanging onto her apron strings and says his glory is going to be taken away and given to a woman, like that's a bad thing. And then,
so our next debate between Tim Nichols and Eric and Drew, it's going to be complementarian and egalitarianism. But let's.
I'm not egalitarian, by the way.
We're soft complementarians, Eric and I. I think that's a discussion for another time. Yeah. So this says, but Christ was faithful as a son over his household. And this is where I feel like I'm taking crazy pills with conditional security folks, Eric, is it says, we are that household if we hold on to our confidence and hope in which we boast, which I think would also, from my perspective, be an indictment against the free grace perspective. This is not a prescriptive, you will remain his house if you do this. This is a descriptive, we are his household if we hold on to our confidence and the hope which we boast. I feel like I'm taking crazy pills, guys. How do you get around this? You must still be believing, or you were not. We are his household if we hold on. Because what started all of this, right, is who's Hebrews talking to, and my contention is that he deals with generally brothers and sisters, but there are times that, and this is the question, who are the warnings addressed to? I think the warnings are addressed to these people that have not yet mixed the word with faith that talks about in Hebrews chapter 4. I'll throw that up here quickly so everyone can see it.
So you prove that you are brethren if you in the future hold on to the word.
Well, you prove, it's not proven this that you prove to God, but that you show to others that you are, and that it's inevitable.
And to yourself.
And to yourself.
And to yourself, right?
Sure. Yeah.
Okay, and that's where it begins to erode assurance. That's where that becomes a problem.
But see, we're not talking about, I think, and here's another acknowledgement, right? Is we all acknowledge that there's such a thing as carnal Christians. And I think the question for me is not what are you doing, is not like, what does your lifestyle look like, but where is your trust at? Is your trust still in Christ? Okay, let's table the gospel conversation and talk about what's happening here. Talk about what's happening with this. But this is Hebrews chapter 4, verse 2 and 3. But the message they heard did not benefit them, since they were not united, or the NKJV says did not mix it with faith, did not unite it with those who heard in faith. And then it says, we who have believed enter that rest.
Mm-hmm.
Anyways, comments, brethren?
I want to circle back to 6 because we never did answer that question. And I want to make sure
good idea.
I don't.
We're a little bit ADD here. We appreciate you getting us focused.
But having said what he says at the end of chapter 5 to this group of people,
right?
This group of, once upon a time, let's be honest, spiritual badasses who have been through more than most of us. And says, and by this time you ought to be teachers, but
right,
you've stagnated. You've gone backwards. You need somebody to explain the basics to you again. And then, right, but meat belongs to those who are of full age, who have their senses exercised by reason of use to discern good from evil. Therefore,
NKJV, that's what you're reading from, right?
Yeah, although a little King James snuck in there.
Okay, cool.
No, but solid food belongs to those who are of full age, that is, those who by reason of use have their senses exercised to discern good from evil, therefore leaving the discussion of elementary principles. So he's now talking about what is he doing in the book. You need somebody to explain you the basics all over again.
Right. Therefore, leaving the discussion of elementary principles of Christ, let us go on to perfection and maturity.
Solid food belongs to people who are doing it. So let's leave the basics behind and move forward. Now, on why? That brings us to 4 through 6.
And I think that maybe where you and I would differ on this, and where we would all differ. And from what I'm a little bit confused on Hebrews 6, actually, because I used to hold one position quite strongly. And since then I have this other position that seems like even more plausible in my head. And so from what I understand, this is a big transition here. And this we will do if God permits. And then he begins talking about this. So you would say that essentially those immature carnal believers that he's talking about here that need to leave the elementary stuff and move on to maturity are the same people that he's addressing here?
No. Okay. No, in 4 through 6, he's warning them against a mistake they're about to make.
Okay.
They are already, like, once enlightened, tasted the heavenly gift, become partakers of the Holy Spirit, based on everything else he says about them in the book. And falling away is the mistake he is writing the book to help them avoid. And if you're going to do that, I can't really help you. So we're moving on. That's what's happening that's what is happening in 4 through 6. If you're going to do that, there's nothing I can do for you. So
in other words, you cannot be renewed to repentance.
No, not what I'm saying at all. It is impossible for whom to renew them to repentance. For whom is the question. Is it impossible for God to renew them to repentance? Or is he just saying it's impossible? I can't help you there. So we're going to move on we're going to talk to other people. If you're that far gone, I can't help you.
I think that some people would say here, and I think that I'm of the persuasion that the renew them again to repentance is actually, it's impossible for they themselves to renew again to repentance of a change of mind. And then
they're going to go past a point where they can't get back.
I think the key word is since they crucify again for themselves the Son of God and put him to an open shame. So I think there's some debate surrounding if they stop doing this, crucifying the Son of God for themselves again and putting him for an open shame, then they can be renewed to repentance. But as long as you're doing this, it's impossible to renew you to repentance.
Then the question would be, what would that look like?
Sure.
So writing to Hebrew Christians who were there when Stephen was stoned, who were persecuted in the great wave of persecution that followed. And if we're going Barnabas, which it can't work actually, but because the
Priscilla,
author
whatever
the author
you
of
say.
Hebrews is second generation. It was given to us by those who heard him.
Right.
It says, so this isn't somebody who met Jesus directly. It's a next generation out. I'm not sure
Did Barnabas meet Jesus directly?
I'm not sure Barnabas fits the bill there. I might be wrong though. It's happened before.
I'm never wrong.
Anyway, to be talking about it, Barnabas. Okay, so Barnabas, Barnabas's place gets looted. Barnabas gets thrown in jail. These are the people who their places get looted. They're bringing food to Barnabas in jail, even though that means they're publicly identifying. They're putting a target on their own backs to do it. What does it look like for them to fall away? Well, they quit gathering with the Christians. They go back to the temple worship. They go back to the synagogue. They rejoin the crowd of people who yelled, "Give us Barabbas." Like there's a visceral, like they crucify again for themselves the Son of God. They rejoin the people who crucified Jesus. And they return to saying that was a good idea.
Oof.
Well, and that's the indictment here. This should just be like a whole Hebrew study, is what we should have basically turned this into. Because I think that the conditional security, once saved, always saved debate, I think, hinges a lot on Hebrews.
And also hinges on what's being threatened here when we get to the fiery expectation of judgment and so on and so forth further down. But again, think about this cohort of people that we're talking to.
So you're saying it's not like this normative universal principle.
Yes.
We're talking about the people who were there.
So is this like no practical application for us? And I don't
know there's practical application
that way, but
yeah, but I know what you mean. No, but you make practical application by starting with what's
actually being said,
what's actually happening there.
Yeah.
What are they being asked to do? What are the consequences of that for them? And then what does a faithful, obedient response to that look like for me? So the one of the really big pieces of that is, become the director of a movie in your head, starring these guys. What's happening? What does it look like when you set the scene? When they go back, so someone disregards this warning. They quit hanging out with Christians. They go back to synagogue. They go back to temple. They rejoin the crowd of people who yelled, "Give us Barabbas." They rejoin. Their priests are the guys who paid off the Roman soldiers to lie and say that they fell asleep. That's what they go back to. What happens to them? Well, come AD 68, the temple stops offering sacrifices on behalf of Caesar.
They're in the temple when Rome sieges.
Titus the Roman comes down, lays siege to the thing, and a certain fearful expectation of judgment devours the adversaries.
It's interesting you bring that up, because I just had this here. My understanding of this is a little bit less specific and immediately, like with regards to the fall of Jerusalem. But my understanding is, if we sin willfully after we have received the knowledge of the truth, there no longer remains a sacrifice for sins, but a certain fearful expectation of judgment and fiery indignation, which will devour the adversaries. My understanding of this is there no longer remains a sacrifice for sins, in the sense that, and I guess what is scholarship on whether or not this was written after, so after the fall of Jerusalem? So,
well, obviously, I'm not reading it that way.
Sure. But I guess the point that I would take from this is, if you go back to Judaism, there is no longer, or in your case, will no longer be a sacrifice for sins. All you have to wait for is a fearful, fiery judgment, fearful expectation of judgment and fiery indignation, which will devour the adversaries. In other words, if you leave Christ and forsake him, there is no other sacrifice for your sins. So just expect judgment, would be my take on this.
And in order to read that passage, you got to back up a little bit, because there's a whole theology of sacrifice and offering coming into that passage. in which he's just made this hope that Jesus is the sacrifice to end all sacrifices, right?
Right.
Sacrifice for sins is no longer. Right? It's no longer, it's not a thing anymore.
Right.
Yeah, that's done. Yeah.
And he's spent the bulk of chapter 10 up to this point making that point, right? So here's the thing. We read 10:26 as if, well, read 10:18.
Okay, here we go.
And is offering for sin, the fact that there is no longer offering for sin in 10:18, is that good news or bad news?
This is the covenant I will make with them after those days, says the Lord. I will put my laws into their hearts, and in their minds I will write them. Then he adds, their sins and their lawless deeds I will remember no more. Verse 18. Now, where there is remission of these, there is no longer an offering for sin.
It's a good thing.
That's good news, right?
Yes.
In other words, if you're forgiven, there's no more sin offerings. There's no more sacrifices. Stop mucking around with the animal sacrifices. Quit it.
10:26. It's still good news. Sacrifice. There's still no sacrifice. There's still no sacrifice for sins. If we sin willfully after we've received knowledge of the truth, we know this. There's still no sacrifice for sins. You're going up and you're doing this thing in the temple. It's not real, guys. It's still not, like, all of this is still true. Jesus was the sacrifice to end all sacrifices. None of that is helping.
So this is good news. There's no longer remains a sacrifice for sins.
Yes.
But a certain fearful. So it's good news that there's no longer a sacrifice for your sins. Jesus has paid for it. But you will receive the fiery indignation of wrath of Rome coming and destroying the temple. If you sin willfully, I'm confused.
Okay. So here's the thing. He's just spent a whole lot of time talking about how there's no more sacrifice for sins and how that is good news. And the blood of bulls and goats can't take away sins. If we sin willfully after having received the knowledge of the truth, what are we talking about? In the immediate context, you're going back to all of that, to that sacrificial system. You're abandoning Jesus as the last sacrifice.
So sinning willfully in your mind is these Jews returning to the sacrificial system and abandoning the assurance of Christ.
That's the immediate context. I'm not saying there's no other possible application for it. But in terms of the people he's talking to in the situation they're in, that's what he's talking about in all of chapter 10. If we abandon Jesus and go back, there's still no sacrifice for sin. It's not like, which is God always accepted this before, right? Like, put yourself in the shoes of somebody who was a follower of Judaism and then became a believer in Jesus. This is not like being a Hindu and then becoming a believer in Jesus. Judaism was what you were supposed to be when Jesus arrived, right?
It seems a lot easier to go back. It seems
God was in it. Yeah. Right?
God was in it.
God was in it. That was okay. And he's saying, don't fool yourself. Jesus put an end to all that. If you go back, the sacrifices are still over. All you have waiting for you is the judgment because you abandoned the Messiah. And that literally is exactly what happened to the people who disregarded this warning and went back to the temple.
Right. True. Interesting. And
I like the cut of the jib of reading this from a social cultural perspective. I'm all about that. So
then the question is theologically, like the question we have to ask,
right,
from our differing theological perspectives, is how do I read this obediently and what does it tell me? Which is a challenge, but we have to start with, what is he saying to whom? Like, what does that look like for them?
And here's some additional context that's good in verse 28. So it talks about devouring the adversaries, and then it says, anyone who has rejected Moses' law dies without mercy on the testimony of 2 or 3 witnesses. Of how much worse punishment do you suppose will he be thought worthy who has trampled the Son of God underfoot, counted the blood of the covenant by which he was sanctified a common thing, and insulted the Spirit of grace? For we know him who said, vengeance is mine, I will repay, says the Lord. And again, the Lord will judge his people. It's a fearful thing to fall into the hands of the living God.
So this is prophetic.
This is directly, well, and notice where he goes next. The very next thing he says after, it's a fearful thing to fall into the hands of the living God. And then he goes into, but remember what it was like at the beginning. Guys, you've got this. Just don't give up. Hang in there.
Yeah.
God was sufficient for you then. He'll still be sufficient for you. Just don't give up.
That's
this
good
is
stuff.
Genius. This is genius encouragement, genius level encouragement to people who are really going through it.
I can't tell whether I agree with you or disagree with you because you presented some things that I've not thought about before. I will say nothing is probably the best thing to do. Just think about it.
We're going to have to, this is it. We're going to have Tim back on for Hebrews part 2.
Yeah.
And
that would be fun. Just focus on Hebrews and hash through some stuff.
I think so.
Cool.
I think if I were a viewer, I would have gotten to about 30, 40 minutes and been like, really, this is when you started talking about Hebrews. So maybe we do need to get into this, because I think for me, I think that the conditional security, once saved, always saved, there are a lot of other passages that, you can talk about, but I think a huge center of it is Hebrews and the warnings that he's dealing with there. And I think that once you resolve that in your mind, other passages are going to take on a different flavor or move in a different direction and stuff.
Well, so think about this. Like this is a place we probably all need to take our own medicine, right? If we're talking with a Calvinist and the conversation starts with, well, what do you do with those passages? And we're all going to go, pick one. Let's talk about it, right? Well,
and I think you stay there, I think is an important aspect, because once we start talking about, for instance, and Leighton pointed this out in an interview that we had with him on his show about John 3:16 and how people will start talking about election and predestination, which is very biblical, which all three of us affirm. Okay. We just don't affirm unconditional pre-creation individual election unto salvation and all of that stuff. But
it's only because the Bible doesn't teach.
Exactly. That's
the only reason.
Right. Yeah. So when a Calvinist says, let's talk about Ephesians 1, you don't go, oh, well, John 3:16. What about for God so loved the world? It's like, just stay in this verse. You need to be able to explain it. And then we can talk about John 3:16. So similarly, let's talk about Hebrews 6. And this, my joke with our Calvinistic Reformed brethren is, they'll say like, oh, what do you think is the passage that refutes our position best? And I'm like, well, Romans 9 and Ephesians 1. Let's go there. Let's talk about it. Because as soon as you see it, that it doesn't teach what you think that it's saying. And similarly for the conditional security debate, I'm like, let's talk about Hebrews, because Hebrews doesn't say what you think it's saying. So
I'm right there with you. Hebrews doesn't say what you think it's saying.
So what we've learned in all of this is we all disagree about Hebrews.
Well, Tim, thanks for coming on and teaching us about our own shortcomings with Free Grace Theology and how we didn't understand it at all, and allowing us to lob some rhetorical grenades at you. You handled them well, and then you taught us a few things about Hebrews 6, and feel like we're just scratching the surface of that. So we've got to have you on again. And in fact, we're going to have you on next week discussing a totally different topic. Stay tuned for that interview with Tim Nichols, part 2, coming up next week on the Provisionist Perspective.
We'll see you then.